Good morning. Javier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, joined by the Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, who today I thank him. He served as the chairman since I was not able to be here at the designated hour. The substitute teacher. I think the class enjoyed the substitute teacher quite a bit today. And we're joined as well by our two chairmen, Chairman Israel and Chairman Lujan. Chairman Israel, who is the chair of the caucus's Communications and Policy Committee, and Chairman Lujan, who is the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I'm thankful that they are here with us. And after the vice chair speaks, he will hand it over to the chairman of the Communications Committee, Mr. Israel. Mr. Israel will then hand it over to Mr. Lujan. Started off this week, I thought, with some pretty good news. We heard that the Boy Scouts have decided to join the 21st century and stop their ban on gay troop leaders. And I think that's great news. Great news for America, because there are a lot of kids who we're missing out from some of the best leadership we have out there. And now moving forward, these troops can decide who their leaders will be, including some of the best individuals who want to lead some of these young men into leadership roles into the future. So we're really pleased about that. And then you come back here to Washington, D.C., and you find that Republicans don't know how to get a transportation bill done to put Americans to work in construction, one of the hardest hit industries back during the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. We're hearing again about these short-term fixes, which do no good for those large contractors, construction contractors, do no good to small cities and counties who are trying to make decisions for big projects, fixing roads, building bridges. In Southern California, in June, we saw the collapse of a bridge off the 10 freeway, one of the main thoroughfares in the country. And in my city of L.A., we've got about a third of the bridges in disrepair. We need to get this stuff done. And there is money there. And we have to make sure that the full amount of money is there to make sure the federal government is providing its proportionate share of what it takes to get our roads and highways and mass transit systems going so that everyone can get to work. And so we're hoping that this Congress will follow the lead of the Boy Scouts, will follow the lead of the president, who continues to do things in the face of a recalcitrant Republican Congress, whether it's trying to figure out how to make sure Iran doesn't become the possessor of nuclear weapons, or whether it's making sure we do trade deals, even though some of us may not have agreed totally with him, or whether it's making sure that we pulled out of that Great Recession back in 08 and 09, and so far nearly 13 million Americans have gone back to work as a result of the work that the president, working with a cooperative Congress, was able to achieve. And last month, 250,000 Americans went back to work. We're hoping that July will have good job numbers as well. But it's just about getting things done. It's not about spectating, and it's not about shutting down government. It's about getting things done, letting people get to work on time by making sure there's good transportation. Doesn't take a whole lot. Little cooperation, we can do that. We would love to reach across the aisle and extend to our Republican colleagues a hand so we can get that transportation bill done. We can make sure our veterans get the services they need, and we can make sure that we make this country and its people as safe and secure as possible by moving forward where we can, working with the President of the United States. And with that, let me yield now to the Vice Chair, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to welcome our great friend and one of the leaders of the House Democratic leadership, Mr. Jim Clyburn, who also has been leading the charge on the voting rights issue within the Democratic caucus and, quite frankly, across the country as well. I'm sure he's going to want to speak about that. As we approach the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, something that we in the Democratic caucus have embraced. We see the crises that exist within our country right now moving forward, what states are doing to restrict voting access, when we should be opening opportunities to make it easier. We see Republican state after Republican state and legislature making it more and more difficult, so we look forward to hearing from Mr. Clyburn. We're also looking forward to celebrating the 50th anniversary of Medicare and Medicaid, July 30th. Again, issues that Democrats really put forward, big ideas. Republicans continue to be looking backwards when Democrats are looking forward. And we look forward this week to celebrating both those significant anniversaries. As the chairman said, we need to stop these artificial deadlines, including this week. It's kind of an artificial deadline, the notion of leaving here before actually getting anything really accomplished is really unacceptable. But once again, the Republican majority is taking the American public for granted. They think that they're not paying attention. Republicans think that no one back home really cares if we don't do a long-term bill, if we don't address the issue of our crumbling roads and bridges and tunnels and other transportation, ports, etc. I just yesterday was in New York City where the Vice President, along with Governor Cuomo, talked about something incredibly exciting, and that is the revamping, a $4 billion revamping of LaGuardia Airport, the gateway to New York City. The vision is extraordinary, what it will do to transform just that one little hub in New York City. But those are the kinds of projects we need to see happening, not just in New York, not just by the Port Authority of New York or New Jersey or the governor of New York or working with Delta Airlines on one particular project. These are things we need to see happening all around the country, and we're not seeing that because there is no vision within the Republican leadership and with the Republican caucus. And they're taking the American people for granted again and again and again. It's time for that to stop. It must stop. With that, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to go to Mr. Clyburn. If I'm going to turn to Mr. Clyburn, the Assistant Leader of the House Democratic Leadership.
Thank you. I hate to be the last one in and not know exactly what's been said, but
you heard it all. You heard it all.
But let me just say two things. On the whole voting rights stuff, I've had several of you that asked me about it this morning. I did have a discussion last week with the Speaker on this issue as to whether or not we can find a way to move forward with the appropriations bills and at the same time address the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. You may recall that when the Supreme Court handed down this decision in Shelby, it invited the Congress to update the formula. The formula is in Section 4, not Section 5 as I often see. In Section 4, there was a formula put there based upon the 1964 turnout of the electorate. The Supreme Court looked at that and decided that we ought to find a formula based on something more current than 1964, and we have done that, working with Congressman Sensenbrenner and John Conyers, Shabbat, and Bobby Scott. These four Congress people have come up with a formula that we think will work if we were to bring it to the floor, and we think it will pass. Now, I've said that I believe that there is a way for our side to work with the Speaker and the Republicans to get beyond this Confederate battle flag issue that seems to have sidetracked the appropriation process. That both these issues ought to come to the floor, and I really believe there's a way for us to reconcile them. Let me just say that I think that it would be a slippery slope for us to get too far into this issue involving the sale of Confederate memorabilia. It is one thing for it to be allowed. It's something else for it to be mandated. If you recall, this was a voluntary effort put forth for people at the National Park Services to go about these sales, but this amendment, the Calvert Amendment, would make it, would remove that voluntary status, and so that's why we have objected. Finally, we did not believe that this whole issue of statutes and all that stuff ought to be brought into this discussion. If a state wants it to be represented by statutes in this building that are are not reflective of its current populace, that's something that state would have to wrestle with. We don't believe that ought to be in the discussion at all. And so I'm hopeful that on this issue we can move forward, get the appropriations back on track, and to get some amendments to the Voting Rights Act done in such a way that it would make that act operative again. This is the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. It's the 50th anniversary of Medicare and Medicaid, the 50th anniversary of the creation of HUD, the 50th anniversary of outlawing quotas in immigrations, the 50th anniversary year of the Higher Education Act. This is a great year to commemorate 30 very progressive Great Society programs that are still on the books today. So this whole notion that these programs were failures, I think, is something that the people ought to take a hard look at what the facts are and not get caught up in this rhetoric. These programs are not failures. They've done good for the American people. They're still doing good for the American people, and I think we ought to keep it on track. And with that, I'd like to yield to my friend Steve, who I wanted to speak before me.
Thank you. That's a good thing I didn't. Good morning. House Republicans are leading America into an August of inaction and obstruction. They are leaving for a month, knowing that we come back to an imminent government shutdown that's going to cost the economy and cost jobs. They're leaving for a month without a real meaningful extension to the Highway Trust Fund. They're leaving for a month without any solution to the issue of immigration other than Donald Trump's constant vilification. They're leaving for a month leaving the Voting Rights Act in limbo. And they're leaving for a month doing nothing to reduce the excessive debt on college students. At the end of August, college students are going to return to campus, and they're going to return to that debt and that tuition sticker shock. And the Republicans are basically saying to them, we don't care. Now, House Democrats are going to hold Republicans accountable for that August of inaction and August of obstruction. Tomorrow, Chairman Lujan and I will be convening a joint strategy session to talk about the contrast that we intend to draw through the month of August on those critical issues that the American people deserve focus and attention to. Final point, Americans know that Republicans in the House of Representatives have been dysfunctional. They're leaving for vacation without dealing with these critical issues. Political dysfunction is one thing, but this dysfunction is actually costing the American people. It's hitting them in their pocketbooks. It's costing them more delays on highways. It's costing them higher bills in colleges. It's not just the fact that these are partisan delays by the Republicans. It's that these partisan delays and this inaction has become very costly to hardworking Americans. And House Democrats will be making those points and pointing to our specific alternatives and contrasts during the month of August. And with that, it couldn't give me more pleasure to introduce the chairman of the DCCC, Ben Ray Lujan. Not me.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well as we're looking at yet again another arbitrary deadline that House Republicans have forced upon us. You'd think as you look at the leadership of the United States Senate and the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, where there seems to be more bickering going on now between the two of them, I think what's not being written about is that they're both Republicans. And you'd think that they'd find a way to work together to prevent all of this dysfunction from hitting the American people. Now that we see this on full display, House Republican dysfunction has become a pattern. We remember what happened at the beginning of this year. A meltdown that occurred that took us to the brink with the funding of the Department of Homeland Security. And we should not forget that at the end of the previous year, leading into January, there was a commitment made by House Republicans that they would not take the American people to the brink. They started the year by putting their political futures, their political security, ahead of national security. And it's gone on and on. The very discriminatory remarks made by Congressman Garrett, where he suggested, as has been reported, that there should not be gay candidates or gay members of Congress. There's been a lot of accountability going on in New Jersey, as there will be across the entire United States. And we have to be there to make sure that the American people know what's happening and not happening here. And we look forward to that conversation as we talk to the American people about protecting their access to the ballot box, the importance of the Voting Rights Act, commitments that it appears that Republicans once made that they would do something about correcting the problems that have been created by gutting the Voting Rights Act when our Republican colleagues joined Mr. Clyburn and Mr. Lewis and so many leaders, including President Barack Obama, in the commemoration of Selma. Well, the best commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Selma is to do something about correcting and strengthening the Voting Rights Act, not ignoring it. So we have a lot of work in front of us. There's a lot to get done. But again, we look forward to working with our colleagues and making sure that the American people know the difference between House Republican dysfunction and the ideas of what we're trying to get done here as Democrats in the United States House of Representatives on their behalf.
Question, Chairman? Any questions?
Mr. Clyburn, you said that you're very hopeful that a deal will come forward, but the House is, House Republicans announced today they're going to leave tomorrow instead of Thursday. You get back, and I think there's just a couple of days left in appropriation, before the August or October 1st.
Right.
Is there any, Speaker Boehner or anyone in Republican leadership give you actually anything tangible about a deal coming forward? Are they saying we're going to work with you, or is it just a continuation of meetings and discussing something? Because they don't really seem to plan on going forward. Actually, Speaker Boehner said it's absolute that they're going to be getting a CR instead of an appropriations process.
Well, I think that's true. But being the South Carolinian that I am, I tend to live by my state's motto, while I breathe, I hope. So that I only have hope that that we could get something done. But I understand. Now, to be honest, the Speaker has made Kevin McCarthy the point person on this, and he did have discussions, or he had a conversation on, as we went out here last week with John Lewis about this. The fact of the matter is, what we're trying to do is reconcile the amendments. John Lewis's bill is a much more comprehensive bill that I have no idea that they will get to. So I would hope that we would do first things first, see what we can do about reconciling these amendments, the Sensenbrenner, Conyers amendments, and we can do that as a part of a CR.
Other questions?
Follow up on that for Leader Clyburn. Speaker Boehner's office has said, at least very recently, that everything on the VRA would have to go through judiciary. And as you know, Chairman Goodlatte has not been interested in moving anything on the VRA. He says that what the Supreme Court did is plenty in terms of voter protection. When you spoke with the Speaker, did he still indicate that it's going to have to go through judiciary, or can you put it on the CR without moving through the committee process?
Well, he told me, he didn't mention judiciary to me. I read that comment was made, but when I spoke to him, he mentioned Kevin McCarthy moving or being the point person on this, and quite frankly, that I'm assuming is the person that we will be dealing with trying to get this done.
Any other questions?
On transportation, we understand you all talked about the Republican proposal like they dropped overnight. How does the caucus feel about that? How do you see it moving forward? And would you prefer longer term?
I think we're all still trying to figure out what the Republican proposal is. As far as we know, there are several Republican proposals, none of which Republicans have seemed to come to an agreement on. So it's hard to know where this will go when Republicans don't know where their own proposals will go. Senate Republicans have one idea. House Republicans have apparently different ideas, and at this late date, they haven't come to terms with this. And I think on the Democratic side, we want to get transportation done long term. We'd like to make sure there's a stable source of funding. and we think we have to step to the plate, that there's very little reason to have excuse on this. So we're hoping that we're given a chance from the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate to actually vote on a meaningful, a real bill that funds our highways and our transit programs so that Americans can put their gas tax money to work the way they expect it to fix roads and build bridges and do all the rest.
If I could just add to that, in terms of the 3-month extended that's being proposed, it doesn't include Exim Bank. Thousands and thousands of jobs are at risk of being lost. Countries around the world are salivating at the notion that Exim will be suspended in perpetuity. And that's just not acceptable. Once again, it's about these false deadlines and creating crises that don't have to exist. I think it's, I know I speak for most of my colleagues when I say it's outrageous what they've been doing, not only with the Highway Trust Fund, with crumbling roads, bridges, and tunnels, but the notion or idea of suspending indefinitely or permanently the Exim Bank is unacceptable to the Democratic caucus. And I think to a good number of the sound-minded Republicans within the Republican caucus, there aren't too many of those, but those that exist, they agree with this as well. Look, at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to be on the floor at this point. We passed a 5-month extender that included the Exim Bank. Mr. McConnell had other ideas in terms of a longer 6-year bill, 2 to 3 years being paid for with pay-fors that we do not accept. And nothing really rational coming back in terms of the user fees and how the trust fund has been paid for in the past or has been bolstered in the past. And that's what we're missing right now is a long-term bill really talking about tough decisions that need to be made that Democrats are willing to sit down and negotiate over, but not to come up with pay-fors that are not related to transportation at all and using them as substitutes.
I would only add that, what's concerning to me is that it seems that the strategy from Mitch McConnell and Speaker Boehner seems to be whoever leaves town first from a Republican perspective can ram the other side. Look, they're both Republican leaders. We need to work this out. And we should be staying into this week and not rushing to get back to wherever it is that members are traveling to get this done. And that's, I think, the frustration that the American people see as well. We have some ideas. We need to get them in. Democrats are willing to lend support to keep people working, to make sure that we're being more competitive around the world and less competitive by working with domestic manufacturers that are creating job opportunities right here in the United States. That's what we should be talking about. But again, I think that's what's on full display again. I think that you've captured it better than anyone else could in the way that everyone is talking about this. So, please keep talking about this so that the American people know what's happening here and what's not occurring.
Jim, did you? Any final question?
And yes, you also mentioned the Iran deal and that some may not agree. And just in context of today's hearing with Secretary Kerry, can you just comment more on that and elaborate?
I think members in the House and the Senate having a pretty robust opportunity to try to not just read the text of the agreement, but to hear directly from those who negotiated the agreement, to hear in a classified briefing from our different agencies and experts in the area of intelligence, foreign affairs, and certainly our experts vis-a-vis Iran and its current status in terms of any weapons and certainly its nuclear development. I think most members are going to continue to try to get as much information as possible to have the best sense possible of how to move forward on this negotiated agreement. So I think we all want to stay tuned and be prepared to respond as quickly as possible when we have an opportunity to vote to signal where we are on the bill. I can tell you that for me, I've reviewed the text, the entire text, and I'm taking every opportunity to listen to those both who negotiated this agreement and those who have a very strong opinion on the other side. So I have a better sense of how to move on this. I do want to thank the President for the work that he did to get us to a point where we can have an opportunity to discuss an agreement, whether there are people who say it's good or bad. The fact is we have an agreement that we now get to take a look at and cast a vote on. And I think that's a good thing. And so I look forward to that opportunity to have that debate and then move forward. And I'll let my colleagues respond for themselves as well.
No, I don't disagree at all with what the chairman has said. I think we're still taking all this information. It's enormous, not just the the text of the agreement itself, but hearing from the experts, those who negotiate as well as those who believe it falls short. But we're taking all that in, and we'll render a decision when that bill is before the House. I will just say, just a comment on the notion or idea that we have, again, this deadline of having to leave because it's August. I remember as a child, my dad was a New York City detective, and we had 2 weeks away every year in the Adirondack Mountains. And one year, my father had called back into work, and he couldn't get out of work, although he thought he was going to be off of work that week. And how disappointed we were as kids that my dad wasn't able to be there for all the 2 weeks that we were there. That's what average Americans do when they have deadlines, and they're told by their employers that they can't take off for a certain day. Our employers, the American people, expect us to stay here until we get the work that is necessary to be completed done. And, you know, if our citizens can't do that, if our constituents can't do that, we their employees ought not to do that as well and neglect what they've sent us here to do, and that is do the hard work, make the hard decisions, but get things accomplished.
With that, thanks very much.